Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. We begin in Ottawa, where the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans met again Monday evening on how to implement a moderate livelihood for Mi'kmaq lobster fishing. The committee heard testimony for Mi'kmaq chiefs and commercial fishers from New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island. Jamie Pashigumskum brings us some details of that meeting.
Transparency and defining a moderate livelihood were the main points of discussion. AFN Regional Chief for Nova, Paul Prosper, said that's not up to a government committee.
That it is beyond the scope and mandate of this committee to provide any definition to legal concepts such as what is a moderate livelihood or a livelihood fishery. To do so would mean to undermine the nation-to-nation negotiations currently undertaken between the Mi'kmaq and federal government.
Listigoo's Chief Darcy Gray says a moderate livelihood would be defined at the community level.
In our practice, we work together with our neighbors, but how we go about fishing, what we view as key principles and values tend to align, but in the day-to-day how to do that, there are different practices. And it wouldn't be for us in Listigoosh to tell Geskabegiak how to fish or what's important or how they define moderate livelihood.
The non-Indigenous fishers say they're being ignored. Cape Breton's Fish Harvesters Association's Michael Barron says they have written letters to ministers such as Jaime Batiste and got no response. He says fishing out of season with no competition is bad for the industry and it gives the Mi'kmaq an unfair advantage.
If too much access is granted through communal and fishing and the commercial, and the stocks start to be depleted somewhat, it's going to affect the overall fishery. So
Ian McPherson of the PEI Fishermen's Association says they want a seat at the negotiations table, or at least a liaison officer that will keep them informed.
We do understand the nation to nation, but I think if people can understand that when there's 10,000 harvesters and one individual negotiating on our behalf, and the response being that we can't tell you what's going on because it's nation to nation, that this has led to a lot of frustration and unfortunately some of the situation that's out there now.
The Fishers Associations say without information, people assume the worst. The committee will meet again on Thursday to hear from more witnesses. Jamie Pashigumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
It's been over a month since the Chicano First Nation launched their moderate livelihood management plan. The violence from the non-Indigenous fishers began immediately. The federal government has appointed Alistair Surratt to rebuild trust between non-Indigenous fishers and Indigenous fishers. Surratt's appointment has been met with concerns about his objectivity and his limited experience with Indigenous affairs and treaty rights. For more, Mr. Surratt joins us now. Mr. Surratt, thanks for being with us. So what does your appointment entail?
Specifically, some facilitation. So what I've been asked to do is to try to see if we can't open up some type of conversation or dialogue, and then to see if there's any common areas that, common grounds that we could find or shared perspectives as a way forward.
You were born and raised in West Pudnico, Nova Scotia. How do you personally feel about the violence from the non-Indigenous fishers?
Yeah, well, I think like anybody else, I think no community, whether it's down in Southwest Nova Scotia or anywhere else, like to see what we've seen in the last number of weeks. And my background is I've been working a lot in public sector, lately over 20 years in the post-secondary, but also heavily involved in the development of our communities. And I'd just like to see a way forward that we can live in harmony moving forward.
In the year 2000, you were appointed to a provincial advisory committee to support the Acadian community, and you were a Minister of Human Resources and Acadian Affairs. How can you be objective with this new position?
Like I've approached all my previous work in terms of facilitation in the past, I try to leave my own opinions, my own judgment aside. In some ways, this work is quite straightforward and very clear for me is that I'll be reporting on what I hear and any path forward. So at the end of the day, what I've been asked to do is to, in terms of deliverables, is to write a report with some advice and recommendations of how we can all move forward for the betterment of all of us. And that report will be public at the end of the day.
Chief Sack has maintained that the non-Indigenous fishermen do not have a seat at the table, and Mi'kmaq treaty rights are not negotiable. Do you accept this, and how does that affect your discussions with non-Indigenous fishers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just to make it very clear, I've been appointed as a facilitator in a separate forum altogether. So it's quite clear that any work that's being done now with Crown Indigenous relations or any other federal government directly with Chief Zach or any of the other First Nations is going to continue. The same thing with any work that's being done between DFO and First Nations or DFO and the commercial fishers. That will all continue. I'm not a negotiator. I'm not there to preempt any other structure that already exists. This is simply another forum to try to open up some dialogue and to see if there's any common ground.
Another concern of Chief Sack is, your past work included working with non-Indigenous fishers and the DFO, and he's expressed concern about your lack of experience in Indigenous affairs and treaty rights. Do you see that being an issue?
Well, this issue here is very complex and is deeply personal for many. At the end of the day, we're dealing with people and we're dealing with communities. For someone like me, it's important that I have a general knowledge of Indigenous cultures, of treaty rights, of the commercial fishery, and I'm going to try to use that in terms of my past experience in terms of moving this situation forward. I am not an expert in many of the areas. However, I have, as I've had in my work in the past, access to a number of government departments if I need some clarification or some further information as to on some files or on some past work that has been done.
Mr. Surratt, we'll have to leave it there, but do appreciate you taking some time for us.
Great, appreciate it. Thank you.
Walpole Island Chief Charles Sampson put the province of Ontario on notice that his community will be establishing Ontario-wide First Nations fisheries. Chief Sampson says he will meet with other First Nations to discuss their treaty and constitutional rights to fish. Their plan is to fish the traditional waters of nearby Lake St. Clair, 2 Great Lakes and the surrounding rivers, including in the state of Michigan. Sampson says the Nova Scotia lobster dispute with Mi'kmaq harvesters won't affect his plans.
It doesn't discourage us one bit. We are ready, and we understand that there's elements of racism everywhere, and it flows and meets us wherever we try to take advantage of our rights and to exercise our rights, and we're prepared to fight for our rights and to ensure that our rights are still there 100 years from this point in time going forward, and that our children's children will enjoy their inherent right to hunt and fish within our traditional territory.
To the COVID-19 pandemic now, and during the Tuesday's briefing, the federal government announced it has earmarked over $1 billion in funding to address housing concerns as the pandemic's second wave plays out. Under the government's Rapid Housing Initiative, $500 million will be available immediately for urban areas with high demand. Another $500 million can be used by Indigenous governments or nonprofits to fund specific projects. But Trudeau fielded questions about his support for RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki and whether he had proof RCMP in Nova Scotia will investigate systemic racism within the force. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say.
We need to do better. We need to pledge every day to work with Indigenous communities, with racialized Canadians, and with all Canadians to reduce systemic racism. We will continue to work with the Commissioner, with the members of the RCMP, and with all institutions that serve Canadians to reduce systemic discrimination and racism throughout our country.
Time to step aside for a quick break, but there's much more to come, including the incredible efforts of two 60s Scoop survivors in search of one another.
But I made a promise to my mother that I would continue to search for her long-lost son.
Welcome back. It's been more than a week since the Chicano First Nation evacuated hundreds of its members due to an unknown oily substance in its water reservoir. Now the community is in a full-scale evacuation after testing found high levels of hydrocarbons in the water. Chief Chris Munoz, who left his home last week, went back Monday along with federal officials and leadership from Indigenous organizations in northwestern Ontario to see conditions and to do more testing. Members are staying in Thunder Bay until the federal government meets community demands. Chicano has been on a boil water advisory for 26 years. About 24 members have chosen to stay in the community as of Tuesday.
They talked about their passion to keep the community safe, to make sure that the houses are looked after, to make sure even our furry friends are looked after. And that motivates me. That makes me want to keep on fighting and addressing the issues that are here in the community.
Two Ontario brothers taken long ago from their home have finally been reunited. It also puts an end to one 60 Scoop survivor's incredible search for his 10 siblings. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
We're on our way, and just up the street here by one of the restaurants, we'll make a left and then go down a couple of streets and make a right. And there he should be with his wife and his 3 daughters, I believe.
With 1,700 kilometers behind him, Rodney Howe's 50-year journey is coming to an end. Howe has come to London, Ontario from his home in Dryden to meet his younger brother, Andrew Dockstader. Dockstader is the 10th and final sibling of Howe's, who were all adopted out to families across Canada and the United States in the 1960s.
He's the last sibling that I know of that my mother had, and it's just part of closure, a promise I made to my mother that while I was viewing her body by myself, there was nobody else around. Everybody else had taken the time to do that. But I made a promise to my mother that I would continue to search for her long-lost son.
It's a connection that was made possible by Belinda Sayu and a healthy dose of luck. Sayu met with Dockstader's wife earlier this year, who casually mentioned that her husband had been adopted.
I said, what was his birth name? And his birth name, last name was Simard. And one of my longtime best friends is Christine Simard, who I'm, still friends with on Facebook, and she lives in Thunder Bay. And so I reached out to her, and sure enough, Andrew is her cousin, who was the last sibling, I believe, out of this family of 9.
Sayo, who is also a survivor of the 60s Scoop, says it was spirit that brought them together, and it's a blessing to have helped the brothers to unite.
It's huge because I know that feeling. I know what it's like to be Andrew. That was me at one point. I had, it's hard. It's hard. You don't know who you are or where you're from.
That was last February, and tonight, in spite of COVID-19, Howe, along with Sayo, meet up once again to make the first face-to-face connection with Howe's long-lost brother.
Good. Hello, there he is. Oh, good to see you, brother.
Howe says he's prepared himself for this day and is ready to share as much as he can about their time at the children's home in Red Lake, Ontario, before their adoptions.
there was a children's home where they would bring kids that were born in the hospital, which was right across, actually, the grass, which wasn't very far away. And when babies were born, they often would take the children from their parents. I remember them bringing over a baby. And it was either you or David, but I know David stayed in the children's home, or brother David. But they brought over this baby, and it must have been you. And obviously they invited our other siblings within the room where you were brought to. You basically all gave you a kiss, then all of a sudden, within 2 weeks, you were gone.
Doc Stater says he's been anxious to actually see his brother. He says tonight's meeting sets out a new path forward.
Sort of like winning the lottery, but it's only like with the family. Because now, they got the extended family and everybody's still alive, and so we don't have to, worry anymore.
Howe and Doc Stater say they'll keep in touch. Once pandemic concerns are over, they plan to meet with their families in Red Lake, making a full circle to where their journeys began. Annette Francis, APTN National News, London, Ontario.
Incredible story. Thanks for letting our cameras come along. Time to take another quick break, but coming up, a look at tonight's episode of Face to Face with our guest, Jennifer Podemski.
I was compelled to address the lack of representation of Indigenous women content creators in the film and television industry in Canada.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Happy Halloween to Jayla from White Dog, Ontario, for being our photo of the day. Here she is dressed up as a baby. Doesn't look like she'll be able to hold her bag of candy, though. You can send your photos to us by emailing your pictures to share@aptn.ca, and we'll do our best to get them on the air. Time now to take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, +5 with showers in St. John's, 5 and sunny skies in Halifax, -4 and sun in Nain, 0 with snow for Cartwright. 9 in Montreal, a rain-snow mix and +1 for Chibougamau. 11 with showers for Toronto, snow and +6 in Sault Ste. Marie. +4 with snow for Thunder Bay, flurries, and 1 above in Sioux Lookout. -6 with snow in Churchill, flurries, and 5 below for God's Lake. Snow and +2 in Winnipeg, 0 with snow in Dauphin. +2 under sunny skies for Saskatoon and North Battleford. -7 in Uranium City, 10 below for Stony Rapids. Over in northern Alberta, 1 in Fort McMurray, -3 for Fort Chip. +5 with snow in Medicine Hat, 6 with the sun out in Edmonton. 14 with showers in Victoria and Campbell River, 12 and rain in Vancouver. 2 in Fort Nelson, 3 with rain for Smithers. -12 in Old Crow, 0 with snow in Whitehorse. 3 below with snow in Yellowknife. -8 with flurries in Norman Wells. Rain-snow mix and 8 below for Sax Harbor, snow and -7 in Pawatuck. -12 and snow in Baker Lake, 8 below with snow for Chesterfield. -19 in Resolute, -5 with snow in Igloolik. BC, like many places, is seeing a rise in COVID cases. As of October 23rd, there were 176 cases of COVID in First Nations communities across the province. Dr. Shannon McDonald from the First Nations Health Authority joins us now from Vancouver to talk about what's being done to keep communities safe. Dr. McDonald, thanks for talking with us. BC has just announced its highest number of infections yet. What recommendations do you have for Indigenous communities?
The same recommendations we've been giving all along. While we've seen the numbers in BC as a whole rise exponentially, Actually, things in First Nations communities have gotten better. We had a bit of a spike with community clusters in mid-September, but right now we only have one community cluster and only 6 active cases on reserve in the province. We have a larger proportion of people off reserve who we are concerned about, of course, but where there are fewer resources is where we're most concerned, and communities have done an amazing job at taking care of themselves and each other.
Are there any challenges you face in getting testing done in those more remote communities?
There are, but they're getting better. We work really hard with our regional health authority partners, and right now we have about a 24-hour turnaround to have a test taken to get a result back. The challenges, of course, are things that we're just getting into with winter weather and travel. Some of our more remote communities, getting the testing swabs out of the community to a testing center is a little more challenging. But we have been given the opportunity to facilitate and implement some testing machines through our partners in the federal government, and we're hoping that those will really assist us in making accessible testing closer to home.
Are there any new tactics from the First Nations Health Authority that are going to be deployed in the fight against COVID-19?
One of our biggest concerns right now is young people and COVID fatigue. We know that it's going to be particularly challenging getting into the winter, less likely for people to socialize outdoors, and recent decisions by our provincial health officer has meant that there should be less visiting in homes, but we know that's going to be really challenging. So we really want to target our younger folk to help them understand their responsibility to take care of themselves and everybody else.
Doctor, we'll have to leave it there, but really appreciate you taking some time for us here today. An all-new episode of Face to Face is just minutes away. Our guest this week is a familiar face on APTN, both on screen and behind the camera. Jennifer Podemski has also recently launched the Shine Network to help Indigenous women in the film and television industry.
Compelled to address the lack of representation of Indigenous women content creators in the film and television industry in Canada. There is not just a lack of representation of Indigenous women perspectives and participation behind and in front of the camera. There is a very severe misrepresentation when there is representation.
And that full episode is up next. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. And be sure to tune in tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another live and spooky edition of In Focus. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.